Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I wanted to return to YouTube doing a autumn reading recommendations. So we are now officially in autumn. The autumn season has arrived. I kind of started doing autumn stuff from September 1st, watching autumn and spooky movies from the get-go, and I've also been thinking about my autumn TBR and I've made a list. I have not been able to work on it very actively because I've been doing some reading for the prize that I'm judging at the moment. We're sort of in the last spurt of time before the deadline, so I've been prioritizing that. But I think I might still put up a autumn reading TBR just because it is, I think, one of my favorite seasons in terms of the mood, the atmosphere, the planning surrounding autumn, and I've definitely been embracing that this year. So today I wanted to sit down and share briefly some books that I would really recommend to read this time of year, but also they're all general recommendations. I sort of tried to find a mix of books that I hadn't talked about in a long time and that I haven't seen enough people read and discuss. I have divided them into three categories: nonfiction, fiction, and picture books. So starting off with the nonfiction, I of course think of mushroom related books when I think of autumn reading, and I have actually done a mushroom books video already, so I will put a link to that in the cards and in the description. So that is a general recommendation, and also I always associate the autumn season with music, listening to more music, and while I am always listening to music throughout the year, I feel like I spend even more time listening to it, but also reading about music. I really like reading about classical music and the reading about the creation of instruments, classical instruments in particular. Anything craft is something I associate with the autumn. So I would also really, in general, say that I would recommend music-related books for autumn reading in terms of nonfiction. And I also have a video of that, so I'll put a link to that as well. The one that specifically came to mind that I haven't talked about in a long time is Maestros and Their Music by John Mossery, which is a book about the work of a conductor, and I thought it was so eye-opening because I hadn't really understood what the conductor did more specifically than just waving a baton or waving a stick, waving hands, whatever. It was really interesting to see that sort of behind the scenes of a orchestra and how it works and how the conductor is sort of setting the tone for the entire group, and also how unglamorous that life can be. So the next one I wanted to talk about has nothing to do with mushrooms or music. That is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I think it is definitely one of the best memoirs I've read in general. It is told in very short chapters, some of them more like flash nonfiction impressions, some of them are longer, and it's very experimental in the writing style. She plays with a lot of different narrative styles to convey a story of domestic abuse. There was one particular chapter that was sort of a choose your own adventure format that sticks out in my memory so clearly, even though I read this book a year ago. And with the subject matter, you can assume, I think, the dark tone that that chapter had. Very uncomfortable reading, but so effective. And another reason I thought this would be good in terms of Halloween reading is that it's sort of about this, almost like a haunted house, both a physical house and like a home that the couple shared, but also a house as in a home, as a symbolic home, and a lot of it because it's about domestic abuse, talks about safety and the lack of safety, having boundaries be crossed and ignored. It's just such a wonderful memoir. Obviously a good read for any time of the year, but it is haunted and dark, and therefore I think if you want to read something that makes you uncomfortable, that that really challenges you as a reader, would strongly recommend. Next we have a not so dark book, Patchwork, A Life Among Clothes. Is a book I read when it first came out. I got a advanced reader copy of it, and it is a book about the author's relationship to clothes, and sort of the memories that clothes and fabrics inhabit. I think, again, it's sort of the connection with crafts and with physical objects, with memory and archives is, again, something I very much relate to this time of year. The time to sit down and reflect, I think, is something I associate autumn with. I thought it was really beautifully told. Again, if my memory serves me, it also is made of very short chapters and sort of impressions and fleeting memories, but it was a standout in the year that I read it, and I've really wanted to reread it ever since. So I feel like I haven't heard enough people talk about this book. It's just wonderful. And I find archives and memory as a topic to read about super interesting. And especially when it's connected to physical objects. And I think that if you are interested in fashion history, you will already know how much clothes can tell about a person's life, about a time and place. If you watch Bernadette on YouTube, you will also be very much aware of this, how much like a lifestyle is imprinted in clothes. And so I think that this memoir was very effective because of exploring memory and history through personal clothing and fabrics, like I said. The next one isn't actually out in English yet, but it's coming out very soon. It's called The Blå Garnet in Swedish, but the English title will be The Blue Yarn by Karin Erlandsson. And it is going to be coming out in November of this year by Daedalus. I will put a link to the publisher in the description. I don't think that they have announced this book as upcoming, but I read an interview with the author where she mentioned this and information about this coming out in English by this publisher. I read this one I think in December last year, and this is a book about knitting, both the author's personal history with knitting as well as more general information about knitting and wool yarns, and I mean everything, like I said, craft related for me is autumn and winter appropriate reading, and it was one of those books I really enjoyed reading. I found to be relatable. I found a lot of inspiration and information that I didn't know, like for example particular types of knitting that have come about through a very specific need, like colorwork yokes starting off becoming a thing because colorwork means that you have a lot of those floats of yarn, which means that it's warmer because there's more layers of yarn, and they were made specifically for example, people who were working on the sea and needed to be keeping their temperatures in a particular way because they were working in very harsh conditions. Just stuff like that I find so interesting and that really inspires me when it comes to my own crafting. So if you're interested in knitting, I feel like this is a must pick up. I'm not sure how much of the information will be new to someone who has been knitting for a long time. Maybe you are more well informed than I was before picking this one up, but I found it to be a very fun read, regardless of the information value, and I'm really happy that it's getting an English translation, so I wanted to specifically highlight it here. That's the nonfiction out of the way. So next we have fiction. Again, I have 2 books that are Swedish and that have English translations. So first is a classic. It's called Dr. Glas by Hjalmar Söderberg. This is a book about, it's kind of a gothic book. It's about a man who works as a doctor, but he becomes involved with a woman and sort of crosses a line of what is appropriate for their relationship, and in particular for his specific position as a doctor. It is a atmospheric gothic classic from, I think it's the late 19th century, or possibly even beginning of the 20th century, so sort of Edwardian times, I would say. And I feel like not enough people have read this book. I really liked the atmosphere of it. I think the tone of it is very autumnal, like him going out to eat, and it's sort of windy and dark, and like I said, it feels very gothic to me. I read it several years ago, so I want to reread it as well. And actually a lot of the books that I have on my list for recommendations in this video are books that I want to reread specifically. But yeah, I just feel like this would be a perfect sort of moral dilemma, psychological novel with a kind of gothic or autumnal atmosphere. Something that I would love to read this type of year, and that I would recommend for you as well. Next is another classic, but it's a children's classic called Brothers Lionheart by Astrid Lindgren. This is a fantasy, and I've been really drawn to fantasy lately. I kind of want to get recommendations for anything really related to a fantasy, whether it be YA or adult fantasy, that feels sort of, I don't know, modern in the sense that there's female characters and that is sort of nature infused. If you know of any fantasy like that, leave any tips in the comments. I would be very appreciative of that, because fantasy is a genre that I haven't read much of, so it's quite new to me. But anyway, that was a side tangent. The Brothers Lionheart is a story of 2 brothers in this fantasy world where there's dragons and there's a quest and there's a village that's sort of almost living in captivity from the dragon, from fear of the dragon, or the monster in this world. And it's sort of, I feel like this is sort of medieval inspired, some of it, and like the villagers compared to the dragon, it feels very medieval in tone, and it's quite a classic quest type story with the good guys and the bad guys, and the good guys having courage and maybe being the underdogs, whereas in contrast to this fierce beast. And I mean, in terms of fantasy, it isn't anything groundbreaking. I think what makes this stand out is the themes of death and of darkness and childhood, with sort of the backdrop of the start of the book. So I don't want to spoil too much about this, but it's definitely one of the darker books of Astrid Lindgren, and I really liked that about it, and I feel like the atmosphere of it has lingered with me a lot since reading this book. So if you have only read Astrid Lindgren's more realistic children's books, then I would specifically strongly recommend this one. Next we have another very dark book, and that is the Notebook Trilogy. Specifically the first book, but I think the entire trilogy is so interesting that if you've read the first one, you probably will want to read on the second and third in the trilogy as well. It's also called the Book of Lies, which is a very important clue when you read more than the first. It's by Agatha Christie, and I think this is one of my favorite novels of all time. It is very much infused with fairy tale and folk tale. Again, very gothic and dark. There's a lot of violence in this. It's about two twin brothers who are left to be taken care of by their grandmother, and the grandmother is very sort of raw and harsh in her way of taking care of them or not taking care of them. I think it's supposed to be the Second World War in the time and setting, and a lot of people are struggling. There's a lot of violence, a lot of hardship, and it's about these two brothers trying to kind of take care of themselves, trying to survive in this very very dark world that they find themselves in. And it's so wonderfully written. In particular, the first the Notebook, the first part in the trilogy, is told very much like a fairy tale, in the sense that all of the characters are called by their function in the story. So for example, the grandmother is just called the grandmother, the baker is called the baker. They don't have names, they have titles, and I think that adds to the child perspective that it is focusing on. It's definitely one of the darkest books I've read, but also one of my favorites. So I don't know what that says about me, but I feel like not enough people know and appreciate Agatha Christie's wonderful writing, so I wanted to specifically highlight her here as well. Next we have another dark one, but it's more magical and fun reading to me, and that is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. This is, I think, supposed to be set around medieval times. I'm not 100% sure, but it's definitely a historical novel. The setting is a monastery. There's a series of murders in the monastery, and a man and a boy starts solving or starts to investigate the murders. It's really fun, like the themes of science, of literature, of knowledge, infused with the murder mysteries is just a perfect blend of a page turner for the autumn season. I feel like this is definitely one of those escapist books that is also really well written. It's definitely the dark academia type stuff that is a little bit older, and I also feel like Umberto Eco is such an interesting and thoughtful person. So would strongly recommend, in case you haven't gotten to this one yet. It's atmospheric, it is filled with so many interesting themes. Like I said, I really loved the literature history and sort of some of the things related to like the origins of literature and it becoming more accessible. It sort of touches on that because the people in this monastery, not all of them have free access to the library, and they also talk about, I think, the copying of texts and that kind of thing. So it's sort of a literary theme going on, as well as being a murder mystery and just being a lot of fun and very, very compulsive reading. So again, a strong recommendation. And then we have the last of the fiction, which is The Doll's Alphabet by Kamila Gradova. This is a short story collection. Again, I feel like I haven't seen enough people talk about this. I would say that in terms of the imagery and the story ideas, it has some similarities to Samantha Schweblin in terms of it's definitely magical realism, it's fairy tale inspired, it's gothic, it's dark, a lot of women in these stories as well, and so I think if you enjoyed Samantha Schweblin's short stories, you might also enjoy this one. I would love to hear if you've read anything else by this author, how you thought, how you got along with those. Especially if you've read the short story collection and the novels, I would love to hear how they compare. But yeah, it's fantastic. I'm not a big short story reader, but this one is definitely a standout. Lastly, I wanted to mention two picture books as well. One of them is She Made a Monster, and this is a children's picture book biography of Mary Shelley. Really beautifully illustrated. I'm gonna check who illustrated it. It was illustrated by Felicita Sala and written by Lynn Fulton. I mean, Mary Shelley is an important figure in Gothic literature. She also had a really interesting life, and both her and her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, and I've read quite a bit about both of them, and I thought this picture book was a really good sort of overview of her life and really, really beautifully illustrated. So this is definitely one that I want to buy and to have in my collection. And then lastly, I wanted to mention another Swedish book. This is Badger's Journey by Cecilia Heikkilä. She wrote and illustrated this picture book. It is a book about adventure, about unexpected friendship, and of daring to take a step and to sort of change your life path. I feel like this is the type of story that is that we can all relate to in some degree, and so it's definitely an all ages recommendation. It is, Cecilia Heikkilä is one of my favorite illustrators currently working, and I'm so happy that many of her picture books have already been translated into English. She has a more recent one called The Ghost and the Mole, I think, that I think is going to be coming out in English next year, if I'm not mistaken. It came out in Swedish this year, that I have out from the library at the moment and that I'm looking forward to reading soon. But I think that she also has some other ones that are available in English. So if you enjoy one of her books, that you can definitely find more as well. So that was all I wanted to talk about in this video. I need to wrap this up because I feel like I'm losing my voice a little bit. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if you are planning to pick up any of them, if you think I would like a particular book based on the books that I recommend to you here, and let me know what you're currently reading as well. I am making my way through The Eighth Life very, very slowly because it's a chunker. It's like, I think, 1,000 plus pages, but I'm reading it on my Kobo and having a good time so far. We'll see how it goes. Definitely historical fiction to me is very suitable for this time of year. But yeah, I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.